artists, we're going to be doing our bee symmetry drawings today. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get this piece of printer paper or copy paper, and I literally just walked over to my printer and grabbed a piece out of the drawer. So this is that thin stuff. You don't want a piece of super thick paper that you can't see through just a tiny bit, just because we are going to depend on being able to see through this to do our full symmetry drawing. So the first thing I'm going to do is I am going to fold my paper like a book. And I want to make sure that my corners line up as perfectly as possible and the edge of my paper lines up as perfectly as possible. And then I'm going to slide my fingers to get that nice crease. And then I'm going to open it up. Now I have 2 equal halves. So I'm going to start about halfway up my paper, and you can just eyeball this, you don't need to measure it. And I'm going to start with the middle body part of that bee, the thorax. And I'm doing what looks kind of like a half circle. I don't want my lines on the end of my half circle to curve in like that, because this is going to be half of a whole. In other words, we are just drawing half of our bee right here so that we can do our other half and have a symmetrical bee. I'm also drawing light until I get it right. I'm actually drawing a little bit darker on mine than I would recommend you draw, just so you can see it well on your screen. But if you want to be able to erase this paper, especially the thin paper, you want to have it drawn light, because this paper doesn't take too kindly to heavy erasing. Now for this next part, which is going to be the abdomen, I'm going to start my line about right here on my half circle. I'm going to take this line out, and then I'm going to take it down. And I'm going to have it go into what kind of looks like a point, and of course this is going to translate into half of the bee once we get that second half drawn. And I'm looking at mine, I'm thinking, ooh, I want to add a little bit more of a curve to mine, so that is actually what I'm going to do. Now I'm going to hop up here for the head. I'm going to start my line about right here on my middle half circle, and I'm going to do another what looks like a half circle kind of going up. And this, of course, is going to be the head. Now, up near the top of the thorax, I'm going to take a line, and I would do this very, very lightly until you are happy with this. I'm going to take this line going diagonal up. It doesn't need to be perfectly straight. In fact, a little wibbly wobbly is actually great. I'm going to bring that line a little bit down, still a little wibbly wobbly, and I'm going to bring it in, kind of dip it down a little bit, and then bring it back to meet that first original line. And this, of course, is the forewing. I'm going to take my pencil now where that forewing started, and I'm going to bring it down diagonal. Again, wibbly wobbly is great, and then I'm going to take it out. What I'm going to do ultimately looks kind of like a stretched out triangle, and bring it back in. Now it could meet that top wing right there, or you might have your wings separated out. Either way is absolutely fine. Now I'm going to do a big oval right here, and of course that's its first eye. I'm going to do the little antenna coming up, and I'm going to start with some really thin little rectangles. And I might curve those out a little bit. And then let's start the legs. So at the very top of the thorax right here, I am going to add what looks kind of like a curved rectangle right here. I'm going to bring my next little curved rectangle-ish type shape in a little bit. And then I'm going to take my last 2 parts kind of going up and out. Now we're going down here and going to start the second leg. And again, I'm just working in shapes to kind of get all those segments of the bee legs. And so some of these little segments look a little bit more like triangles. Some of them look a little bit more like curved, funky rectangles. You don't need to be perfect. I think the fact that we are doing segments for the legs makes it look a little bit more realistic either way. And then, of course, since bees are the insects, they have how many legs? They've got 6. So we're going to do that third leg, which is going to translate into our 6th leg on the second side. And into some little segments kind of coming down. One thing that might help, if you have a second picture of an actual bee to look at while you're doing this and you want to change some things up, that is absolutely fine. A lot of reference photos of the bees are going to be slightly different and have little variations in them, and that's great too. Right here, I'm going to add a second little half circle in my thorax, and I'm going to go ahead and start to get some stripes in here. I'm just giving a light little shade into these so I can kind of keep track of my black stripes. Now look at your bee at this point and see if there's any changes that you want to make. For example, I'm looking at that wing and I kind of don't want it to be that pointed on the edge. I'm going to change this up just a little bit while I still can. Now, a couple options that you have, you can do all of those cool shapes that you can find within a bee's wings if you would like. We're going to keep ours just pretty simple and keep them as is right now, but that is an option if you want to take it up to the next level. Now at this time, get a Sharpie or any dark marker that is fairly substantial. A black pen may or may not be dark enough for what we're doing. You could always try it if that's all you have. But again, I would recommend a Sharpie if you have one. I'm going to go over all of my pencil lines with a Sharpie marker. By the way, be careful about the surface that you're doing this on. Sometimes this printer paper with a Sharpie, the Sharpie will kind of go through. So if you're drawing on a table that you don't want to have any kind of marker on, you might want to put something underneath this. Now, even though I've kind of lightly colored in or shaded in some of the parts that I ultimately want to be black, I'm going to hold off from coloring it in for right now. Now I'm going to switch the screen over so you can see what I'm going to do to get this image mirrored over to the second side to do the second half of the bee. So what I'm doing right here is I'm finding a window, and watch this part before you find a window because you might not even have to find a window. I'm coming over here and I am opening up my half of the bee drawing, and I'm going to fold it so that the back of my paper, the blank side of my paper, goes behind the drawing I originally did. So again, I'm taking that paper, my drawing is front right here, and I'm folding it. And it's really easy to do that because I already have that nice crease in my paper. Now at this point, if you're sitting at your table, you might look at yours and be able to see through to that back side in the first drawing that you did just sitting at your table. And if you can, that's fine. You don't need to find a window. But this is kind of using a substitution. A lot of artists have light boxes and they use the light to shine in behind and they can see what they're drawing. But since we are at home right now, this is an easy substitution for a light box. So once again, I'm opening up my Sharpie marker, and with this held against the window, and you can see right there on the camera how easy it is to see my drawing from the first side coming through right here. Now once again, just make sure you're not drawing in a place where the marker might go through your paper and ruin something that you're working on. So I'm really going through and I'm really going to take my time right here trying to get my lines exact. So I am tracing my original lines now on this second side of the paper. Especially be careful when I get near the edge of that paper. You could stop a little bit short if you need to so that you don't go off that paper. If you do stop a little bit short from the edge of that paper, you can always fill it in easily when you open the paper back up. I'm going to check, make sure I've gone over all of my lines, and then I'm going to open it back up, and that is pretty awesome. So you can see I now have my symmetrical drawing, so one side is a mirror image of the second side. And there might be some little details that I want to go back in just a minute when I sit back at the table, and that's fine too. All right, now that I'm back to my original drawing spot, I want to take a few minutes to just kind of clean this up. Now there might be some spots, say right here, I can see that this is a little bit thicker and darker than the other side, and then same thing up here. So I'm just going to kind of go through and clean it up a little bit. And you can see down the middle, that's kind of where I skipped the edge of that paper a little bit when I was drawing against the window. So this is a good time for me to just go ahead and connect these lines. Now, if your lines aren't lining up as perfectly as you like along the edge of the abdomen, what you can do is thicken up that line like you see me doing. Now, if you've got any stray pencil lines showing up at this point, I would take the time and the care just to erase those out very gently. And of course, in a real bee, you've got tons of more patterns, especially within the wings. You've got textures, especially on the body of the bee. They almost look kind of furry. You've got pollen that they collect all over the body. So you could really have a whole lot of fun adding details. I kept this pretty simple just for the sake of getting our symmetry drawing in. And so you can see that we've done the symmetry drawing. Now, everybody might have different materials you're working with. So you could go ahead and start to fill in some of the areas you want with your black marker, or you could start to do crayons, colored pencils. I would definitely not do paint on this paper because it does not handle that paint very well. Crayola markers might work okay. Just check and make sure because they might bleed through that paper just a bit. You could also use pencils and add a lot of value. And I should also say, if you wanted to add more details like the patterns and the lines and some of the textures on there, I would challenge you to do it the way that we did it, adding it with Sharpie or maybe a pen first, and then seeing if you can translate it from the first side to the second side using that symmetry drawing method of possibly holding it up to the window. I think it would look pretty cool to darken in some of these segments on the legs, so that's exactly what I'm going to do. Now notice I'm leaving a little speck of white on each one, almost kind of like a little reflection. So I do want to challenge myself to try to leave that little speck in the same place or around the same place on each side. It doesn't need to be perfect, but I'm trying to respect that symmetry drawing. So you can see, to kind of measure that or eyeball this, I am just filling in from the outside of my shape into the center. Saw that I accidentally got a little line coming out right here when I was tracing, so I'm going to challenge myself to get those little mistakes on both sides too. That way they look kind of intentional, maybe even happy accidents. So even in adding my color, I am going to think whatever I do to one side, I want to do the same thing to the other. So I'm taking this darker color on the edge, and so since I've done it to this left side, I'm going to jump over and do it to my right side. Like I said, it might be helpful to have a reference photo for a bee out, especially at this point where you add in your final details. Now I'm having too much fun. I'm going to go ahead and cut myself off right there, but I'm moving into the wings with that pencil because the wings are translucent or see-through. A pencil might be a nice device to add some detail with the coloring or the shading or the light shading in those wings with. Now that you've gotten your symmetrical drawing in, I think one thing that might be nice, and it is optional, but drawing like a scientist, you might want to go through and label all the different parts of your bee. Now your labels do not need to be symmetrical. You can put some words over here, different words over here, obviously, but you've got your symmetrical drawing in. I know these look fabulous. Thanks for following along, guys.